8-year-old Ethan Caldwell had never heard his own name spoken aloud, until the day a school janitor with calloused hands made the millionaire's son feel something no doctor in the world could give him. And what happened next would leave Boston's wealthiest family questioning everything they believed about silence, healing, and love. On Beacon Hill, where historic brownstones overlook the glittering harbor and power quietly shapes the city's future, Victoria Caldwell stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of her modern glass mansion, staring down at a world she controlled but could not conquer. At 38, she was hailed as a tech visionary, the founder of a cybersecurity empire worth hundreds of millions, a woman whose signature could move markets and whose interviews filled business magazines from New York to Silicon Valley. Yet none of her influence could penetrate the quiet world her son lived in. Ethan had been born profoundly deaf, and from the moment doctors at Massachusetts General Hospital delivered the diagnosis, Victoria turned grief into strategy. She flew in specialists from Europe, funded experimental research at Harvard, invested in cutting-edge cochlear technology still in clinical trials, determined that money, intelligence, and relentless discipline would succeed where biology had failed. But 8 years later, the nursery that once held musical mobiles and lullaby speakers remained achingly silent. Since the death of Ethan's father in a helicopter accident 3 years earlier, the boy had withdrawn even further, retreating into a private stillness that unsettled even seasoned therapists. He communicated through basic sign language when prompted, but rarely initiated contact, rarely smiled, rarely responded to the parade of experts who came and went through the Caldwell estate like consultants reviewing a failing division. Every morning at precisely 7:15, a driver escorted Ethan to St. Matthew's Academy, an elite private school tucked behind wrought iron gates in Brookline, where age shadowed him. Interpreters hovered nearby, and administrators assured Victoria that inclusion and innovation were their highest priorities. Yet beneath the polished assurances lingered the uncomfortable truth that even in the best institutions, difference can feel isolating. Meanwhile, across the city in a modest apartment in Dorchester, Daniel Rivera rose before dawn, quietly preparing oatmeal for his 10-year-old daughter Sophia before heading to his job as a janitor at the very same academy. Widowed 5 years earlier after his wife's long battle with cancer, Daniel had learned that strength did not come from controlling outcomes, but from showing up consistently, day after day, even when exhaustion pressed heavy on his shoulders. His hands bore the roughness of labor, his uniform carried the faint scent of disinfectant, and his paycheck barely covered rent and groceries. Yet his small kitchen echoed each morning with Sophia's laughter, a sound that Daniel cherished precisely because he knew how fragile joy could be. He often told his daughter, "New day, new strength." A simple motto born not of motivational books, but of survival, and he carried that philosophy with him as he unlocked the maintenance closet at St. Matthew's, greeting teachers with polite nods and students with gentle smiles that most hurried past without noticing. Ethan had noticed nothing at first. He moved through the corridors like a ghost wrapped in privilege, shielded by staff, insulated by reputation, the Caldwell boy, whose silence was treated with a mixture of pity and careful professionalism. Yet behind his gray-blue eyes churned emotions no one seemed willing to sit with long enough to understand. Victoria, reviewing security reports and therapy updates between investor calls, believed she was doing everything a devoted mother could do, but her version of devotion resembled a strategic campaign: measurable goals, scheduled interventions, progress charts pinned to digital dashboards, as if love could be optimized. Through data analytics, nights in the Caldwell mansion followed a precise rhythm: dinner prepared by a private chef, homework supervised by tutors trained in special education, quiet time structured by developmental guidelines, and then Victoria lingering outside Ethan's bedroom door, pressing her palm to the wood as if proximity could substitute for connection, whispering promises he could not hear, yet hoping somehow he would feel the intention behind them. In Dorchester, Daniel tucked Sophia into bed with stories improvised from memory, sometimes about brave sailors crossing stormy seas, sometimes about ordinary people discovering hidden courage, never imagining that soon he would become part of a story larger than any he had told. The two families existed only miles apart, yet inhabited different universes, one defined by boardrooms and private equity, the other by overtime shifts and scraped knees, and no headline writer in Boston would have predicted that their paths were destined to intersect in a way that would challenge medical assumptions and reshape a mother's understanding of what it truly means to listen. The moment that set everything in motion began quietly, without fanfare, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon when classes were dismissed early due to a nor'easter warning. While teachers rushed to adjust pickup schedules and parents coordinated drivers, Ethan slipped away from the supervised hallway, drawn not by sound, but by the faint vibration of something metallic echoing through the tiled corridor near the gymnasium. Daniel was replacing a faulty light fixture in the storage hallway, the steady clink of tools against ladder sending subtle tremors through the floor, vibrations too soft for most to register, but strong enough to ripple through the souls of a sensitive child standing alone in a world without sound. When Daniel climbed down and turned, he found himself face to face with the most powerful woman in Boston's sun, staring up at him with an intensity that made the bustling school fade into the background. Daniel did not yet know the boy's name, did not recognize the significance of the moment, and could not have imagined that this silent encounter would ignite a transformation no amount of money had been able to purchase. But as he looked into Ethan's searching eyes, he felt something instinctive and profound, that sometimes the greatest breakthroughs begin not with sophisticated equipment or prestigious degrees, but with the courage to stand still inside someone else's silence and truly, patiently, unbelievably listen. The first time the millionaire's son reached out on his own, it wasn't to a doctor, a therapist, or even to his mother. It was to the janitor holding a wrench in a dim hallway at St. Matthew's Academy. And that single stretch of a small trembling hand would set off a chain of events no one in Boston's wealthiest circles could have predicted. Daniel Rivera froze when he saw the boy standing near the storage corridor, rain streaking down the narrow window behind him, gray afternoon light casting long shadows across the lockers. He recognized Ethan Caldwell immediately, not because he followed business news, but because every staff member at the academy knew the silent child who moved through campus surrounded by aides like a fragile artifact. "Hey there, buddy," Daniel said instinctively, then stopped himself when Ethan didn't react. Instead of repeating the greeting louder, the way most people did when confronted with silence, Daniel studied him carefully, noticing the hearing devices tucked behind his ears, the guarded tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes tracked vibration more than movement. So Daniel did something simple and unusual. He set his tools down slowly, crouched to Ethan's eye level, and didn't speak again. The hallway hummed faintly with the building's heating system, and Daniel placed his palm flat against the metal locker beside him, tapping twice with his knuckles, firm enough to create a vibration, soft enough not to startle. Ethan's head tilted, his gaze sharpening, and Daniel repeated the pattern. Tap, tap, tap. It wasn't a word, not even close to language, but it was rhythm, and rhythm travels in ways sound alone cannot. Carefully, deliberately, Daniel pressed his own hand against his chest and tapped twice again, letting Ethan see the motion before gently guiding the boy's small hand forward. There was hesitation, months, maybe years of instinctive withdrawal, but then Ethan allowed it, his palm resting against Daniel's heartbeat. Thump, thump. The boy's eyes widened, not with fear, but with recognition. Daniel smiled softly and repeated the pattern against the locker, then against his chest, creating a bridge between vibration and human connection. For several long seconds, neither moved, yet something electric passed between them. Not sound, not speech, but understanding. When an aide finally rushed down the hallway calling Ethan's name, breathless with alarm, she found him still standing close to the janitor, one hand pressed to Daniel's chest, as if guarding a secret discovery. The incident was reported immediately. By evening, Victoria Caldwell was reviewing security footage in her private study, watching the grainy black and white recording of her son doing something he rarely did, initiating contact. She replayed the clip 3 times, zooming in on Ethan's face, catching the unmistakable flicker of curiosity there, and for a moment her perfectly controlled composure faltered. The next day, she arrived at the academy unannounced, heels striking sharply against polished floors, demanding clarification from administrators who scrambled to reassure her that protocols had not been violated. She insisted on meeting Daniel Rivera personally. When Daniel entered the conference room, uniform neatly pressed despite the faint scent of cleaning solution, He found himself facing one of the most influential women in Massachusetts, her posture rigid, her expression unreadable. "You interacted with my son yesterday," Victoria began without preamble. Daniel nodded respectfully. "Yes, ma'am." "On what authority?" The question carried the weight of boardroom interrogations. Daniel answered simply. "He walked into the hallway where I was working." Victoria folded her hands. "My son is under specialized care. He has a full therapeutic team. I cannot have untrained staff experimenting with him." Daniel held her gaze, not defiant, not submissive. "I wasn't experimenting," he said quietly. "I was listening." The word hung in the air between them, sharp and unexpected. "He cannot hear," Victoria replied coldly. Daniel paused before answering. "Maybe not with his ears." The administrators shifted uncomfortably, but Victoria remained still, studying him as if assessing a risk. She had built a career on identifying weaknesses, yet this man's calm unsettled her more than open arrogance would have. Against her instincts, and perhaps because the security footage revealed something undeniable, she permitted limited supervised interaction, provided no boundaries were crossed. And so, over the next weeks, something remarkable unfolded in the quiet corners of St. Matthew's Academy. Every afternoon, Ethan found reasons to drift toward maintenance corridors or empty classrooms where Daniel worked. Sometimes Daniel would tap patterns along a wooden desk, guiding Ethan's hands to feel the vibration travel through the grain. Other times he placed a portable speaker face down on the floor, turning the bass high enough that low-frequency pulses rippled across the tiles, encouraging Ethan to stand barefoot and feel music rather than hear it. Daniel did not rush, did not demand response, did not celebrate progress with exaggerated praise. He matched Ethan's pace, allowing curiosity to lead. Teachers began noticing subtle changes. Ethan's eye contact lingered longer, his signing grew more fluid, his posture less defensive. At home, Victoria observed shifts she could not quantify. Her son touching surfaces thoughtfully, pressing his palm against walls when passing the kitchen where appliances hummed, even placing her hand once against his chest and then against her own, as if testing something. Specialists were consulted. Some dismissed the janitor's influence as coincidence. Others acknowledged that sensory integration often unlocked dormant neural pathways, but none could deny that Ethan was engaging more than before. Meanwhile, Daniel returned each night to Dorchester, sharing fragments of his day with Sophia, careful never to betray confidentiality, yet unable to hide the quiet awe in his voice. Sometimes, he told her one evening while washing dishes, "People don't need you to fix them. They just need you not to be afraid of their silence." Sophia nodded solemnly, too young to grasp the magnitude of what was happening yet old enough to understand her father's sincerity. The breakthrough came unexpectedly during a supervised session in the school's unused music room. Daniel placed Ethan's hands on a large resonance board borrowed from a special education consultant, then tapped a slow, steady rhythm beneath it. The vibration pulsed upward, subtle but persistent, and Ethan's breath hitched, a reflex that caught even the supervising therapist's attention. Daniel repeated the pattern, slower this time, matching the cadence of a heartbeat, and something shifted visibly in the boy's expression. Not confusion, not fear, but concentration, as if he were aligning internal and external worlds for the first time. Victoria, observing from behind a glass partition, felt her pulse race. She had spent 8 years chasing solutions that involved advanced circuitry and surgical consultations. Yet here her son stood responding to something profoundly simple. Daniel did not claim expertise, did not look toward the observation window for approval. He focused solely on Ethan, tapping gently until the boy's lips parted, as if testing air itself. It wasn't speech, not yet, but it was effort, voluntary and unprompted. And in that suspended moment, the distance between Beacon Hill and Dorchester seemed to shrink to nothing at all. The sound that finally broke 8 years of silence was so soft that only 3 people in the room realized history had just been made. A janitor with steady hands, a trembling mother who had built an empire on certainty, and a little boy who had just discovered that silence did not have to be permanent. It happened on a gray Thursday afternoon inside St. Matthew's unused music room, where low winter light filtered through tall windows and dust motes floated above the polished floor. Ethan stood barefoot on the resonance board Daniel had borrowed from a sensory therapist, his small palms pressed flat against its surface as Daniel tapped a slow, grounding rhythm beneath it. Thump, pause, thump thump, steady as a heartbeat. Victoria watched from only a few feet away this time, no longer hidden behind observation glass, her manicured hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles blanched. She had stopped pretending this was merely an experiment and had begun to hope in a way that terrified her. Daniel lowered his voice even though he knew volume did not matter, speaking more for comfort than instruction. "It's okay, champ. Just feel it." He tapped again, matching the cadence of a human pulse, and Ethan's breathing grew uneven, not distressed, but focused, as though he were reaching towards something invisible. The supervising therapist leaned forward, ready to intervene, but Daniel subtly shook his head. This wasn't a medical procedure, it was connection. Then Ethan did something no chart, no specialist, no million-dollar device had been able to provoke. He pulled one hand off the board and placed it against his own chest, mirroring the gesture Daniel had taught him weeks before. Thump, thump. His lips parted. A faint exhale escaped, not accidental, not reflexive, but shaped, deliberate. Victoria's heart pounded so loudly she was certain she would drown out whatever might come next. Daniel tapped once more, softer this time, and Ethan looked directly at him, eyes bright with effort. The sound that followed was raw and fragile, more breath than voice, but undeniably intentional. "Ah!" the therapist gasped. Victoria staggered forward as if struck. Daniel did not celebrate. He held steady, eyes warm, and tapped again, encouraging repetition without pressure. Ethan swallowed, pressed his palm to Daniel's chest, as if drawing courage from the rhythm beneath his ribs, then turned slowly toward his mother. For 8 years she had whispered promises into a silence that never answered. Now her son's gaze locked onto hers with a clarity she had never seen before. He reached for her, guiding her hand to his chest the way Daniel had done that first day in the hallway. Thump, thump. His mouth trembled, jaw stiff from muscles rarely used. And then, imperfect and cracked but unmistakable, he shaped 2 halting syllables. "Ah." Victoria collapsed to her knees, tears breaking free in a way no boardroom defeat had ever forced from her. "Mom?" she breathed, hardly daring to believe it. Ethan tried again, the sound stronger this time, pushing through fear and unfamiliar sensation. "Mom." The word landed like thunder in a life that had known only silence. She wrapped her arms around him carefully, as if he might shatter, sobbing openly while the therapist covered her own mouth in stunned disbelief. Daniel stepped back, giving them space, but Ethan reached out and caught his sleeve, unwilling to let the bridge between worlds disappear. Later, doctors would explain that Ethan's deafness had not vanished, that what Daniel had unlocked was not hearing, but neural engagement. The tactile rhythms had stimulated underused vocal pathways. The emotional safety had reduced the psychological barrier that specialists had overlooked. It wasn't a cure in the clinical sense. It was a catalyst. Over the following months, therapy integrated Daniel's rhythm-based methods into structured speech development. Ethan learned to vocalize through vibration, to associate breath with meaning, to feel language even if he could not hear it. Each new sound felt like a small sunrise, fragile, hard-won, miraculous in its persistence. Victoria, who once measured success in quarterly gains and acquisition targets, began measuring it in syllables and smiles. She canceled investor dinners to sit cross-legged on the living room floor, tapping gentle rhythms against Ethan's back, learning to wait instead of instruct, to accept instead of optimize. The media eventually caught wind of the story. Headlines whispered about the janitor who gave a millionaire's son his voice, but Daniel refused interviews, insisting he had done nothing extraordinary. "I just stayed," he told Sophia one evening as they washed dishes together in their Dorchester kitchen. "Sometimes that's enough." Victoria thought differently. She established the Rivera Sensory Communication Foundation, funding programs across Massachusetts that trained educators in tactile and vibration-based therapies for deaf children, determined that what began in a maintenance hallway would not remain an isolated miracle. Yet the true transformation was quieter. Friday evenings at the Caldwell home, where Daniel and Sophia were no longer visitors but welcomed guests. Laughter now echoed through rooms once defined by sterile perfection, and Ethan moved freely between the two families, signing confidently, speaking haltingly but proudly, unafraid of either silence or sound. One late autumn afternoon, as golden leaves drifted across the Beacon Hill courtyard, Ethan tugged at his mother's hand and then at Daniel's, guiding them both to sit on the steps. He placed one hand on Victoria's chest, one on Daniel's, feeling the steady rhythm beneath each palm, then tapped his own in return. 3 heartbeats aligned. He looked up, searching for the word he had practiced all week, and though the syllables were still rough around the edges, they carried strength born of courage. Family. Victoria's breath caught. Daniel's eyes shimmered. Sophia squeezed Ethan's shoulder gently. In that simple moment, the boundaries of wealth and class dissolved completely, replaced by something infinitely more valuable: presence. The miracle had never been about restoring hearing. It had been about restoring connection, about teaching a mother that love cannot be engineered, and teaching a boy that his voice existed even if the world arrived to him without sound. And as dusk settled over Boston Harbor, painting the skyline in amber light, Victoria understood a truth that no business school had ever taught her. The greatest breakthroughs do not always come from those with the most resources, but from those willing to kneel in someone else's silence, tap a steady rhythm of patience, and wait long enough for a heartbeat to answer.